In this concluding portion of our conversation, Mini Krishnan talks about the need to keep languages alive, to carry these tongues to universities, to colleges, to people across spectra. She looks at the possibility of a community of people connected across languages, cultures, and points of view. The joy of languages, a wonderful, beautiful polyphony. This and more in conversation with Mini Krishnan. Now that you mentioned this, I was thinking about a leading question, which is there a resistance to translation? And if so, where does it come from? On what levels do they come?
I don't know. I mean, if you look at the way Russian literature, South American literature just boomed, French literature, all those things reached us through translation. And at the time, in the early 20th century, when English was so powerful and so the prestige language in our country itself, a lot of European texts were translated into English, and they were very highly regarded. We all learned about French literature and all the stories through that translation. So there was no resistance there. See, that is that. We, I think, are very open-minded about translation. We would love to read uh, other people's literatures, but um, two things. One is something to do with possibly language or some sort of snobbery, which is both language as well as cultural. A distrust, suspicion that it may be inferior um, or not properly. Because I think most people's introduction to translation came via films where you have those superscripts, and they're
Right.
mostly badly done. So that I think got translation a bad name. And then there are two kinds. One is the very powerful marketing of books in English, which flooded all our bookshops. And then when the translations started to appear, uh, they were not given enough space. Uh, Journals and newspapers didn't review them enough. Again, give them enough space. There was that situation. In academia, as I said earlier, an unwillingness to experiment with anything new. So, at one level, you want to know about other cultures, but uh, and you do read, but when it comes to studying or giving them a certain status, you hesitate because you're worried about norms. Against what will you measure them? What are the scales? Academics love frameworks. How will you framework it? And then you tend to teach translation like you teach English literature. That may not be accurate. So all these things destabilize the teacher. But the readers of translation, I think at the same time came this group of what I call language orphans, like me, like I was earlier, um, who know their language very well. They speak it, they're culturally very, very uh, comfortable in it, but they can't read the language. So they long to read their texts. And I think that is the body that is demanding more and more texts, books from their languages. And that branch of translation is flourishing, that of work. And then simultaneously, the prizes, awards, the literary festivals that honor translators, honor our own writers, and the rise of nativism, the realization that we should be prouder of ourselves than we were earlier, that our identity lies in these, and that I think is well discussed and well known that there's definitely an issue of identity when it comes to literature, culture, reading, the things you read. And I also think that the human mind is such that you long for something that you can hook yourself to. Yeah, that's me. I recognize that. And then the suspicion of something that's not me. No, I don't want to read that because it's not. But there is the curiosity, let me read it. What's that about? Somebody repudiated in public? Three wives, two wives? Not that, I mean, there's all this talk of Muslims having more than one wife. What about the Kulin Brahmins who had so many wives? What about the Nambutris who had. So, what we're missing in not reading each other's texts is the cultural and material aspects of our society, how society has changed, and the role of women, uh, which is crucial to our social history and progress. So both social progress and economic progress. All these things can really reach us. This kaleidoscope, palimpsest, whatever you want to call it, can reach us only if we read each other's writings. So there is both resistance and interest. Um, it's working. In between, there was a break.
Now it's working.
Yeah, earlier there was a break. So that's the way I see it. Um, I don't bother much about these things because uh, I also believe in something called our literary destiny. And I've handled sufficient numbers of books to know that when a book has a certain destiny, it will fulfill it. The one is this Kocherati, which Jayashree introduced me to. 2003, I was in Trivandrum for a conference and Narayan was there. Mayappa Panik was there. By that time, Panik had seen some of the Oxford books and he was very happy because he said, if Oxford comes onto this platform, it'll get a sort of visibility and a certain respectability it didn't have before. Though, mind you, Macmillan's did also, the Macmillan list uh, did give translation impetus because no other publisher had done a systematic program. There were many other publishers, Penguin and um, so many others had. But there was the occasional book of focusing only on one language. But when Macmillan did, 5 books from 11 languages, and a systematic, every year we brought out 5 books, 6 books, 8 books. That was different, and that made people, I think a little. At the same time, Katha, Geeta Dharmarajan's one-man army, I call her, what she did with Katha. So at that time, uh, Professor Panikar said, a really useful thing, I want to introduce you to someone. And he introduced me to Narayan, and he told me, a really useful thing you can do is to translate his book. I had no idea. And then Jayashree introduced me to Catherine, and I think Catherine had described it in either the introduction to the book or in an article, how and Narayan himself, I mean, he spent 10 years just trying to get that book into Malayalam. And then it had to wait another, I don't know how many years, 28, another 12 or 13 years for it to appear in English. And guess what? It got a prize. So, but if you really analyze the translation, and Catherine will be the first to admit it, I mean, we really struggled because it's written in a particular kind of dialect, and then the first jump was into Malayalam itself. This is what it means in this, and then from Malayalam into English. Uh, it was one of the slowest works I ever managed to publish. So resistance and patterns of work. Um, like I said, I believe in destiny. So and look at Karaka. Whoever thought it would? And look where that book has gone. And the thing is, the writer herself never had any notion of publishing in order to be known, or I want my tell my story. She was so miserable, emotionally so upset that her priest, who was also her teacher in school, told her, just write it out, put it all down on paper, and that's how she wrote it. Nobody would publish it because they said, what is this? This literature? Is this grammar? Is this wrong grammar? So nobody would even publish it. So finally, her priest friend, Mark Stephen, published it himself. He just put up a little imprint called New Ideas or something and published it in Tamil. And luckily, it was sent to the Hindu, and somebody gave it to Ashokamitran, and he reviewed it. That's destiny.
Absolutely. You know, I was about to ask you what makes you decide on your choice of text to be translated, but I think somewhere the answer is
The
already
answer is there, yeah, yeah.
it's there. Now, you were
But
mentioning
by,
all these.
excuse me, this Tamil Nadu thing is different. There's an advisory committee, and they draw up lists. And then I also send out word to my friends in publishing and say that what are you working on? Because if it fits with this, if I can match this against this, government will buy 500 copies, 200 copies of the hardback and 300 of the paperback. So there's a very good government and private publishers nexus building here. The difficulty, of course, is that again it's a slow process. But some 6 books have come out, another 9 books will come out by January. So selection of texts, it happens in different ways. And then when people hear that something's going on, say, hey, there's a biography which is out of print, and there's Rambu Jamal who gave up her entire life. I mean, she became she was a Gandhian, for a follower of Gandhi. She refused to marry. And she wrote her autobiography. It starts late 19th century, right through that Khadi movement and the meeting in Karpadi and I think Gandhi and all that. It comes right up to 1960s or something. She set up a little with her share of the family. I think she set up a small Srinivasa, what did she say? Her father's name, Srinivasa Gandhi Nilayam. She set up a place where, people can come and talk about Gandhi, to have religious discourses or multi, whatever it is. So, and they published that book. There's only one copy left of that book. That's in a library. The Xerox of that is with a very well-known musicologist and historian named V. Sriram. So V. Sriram caught up with me while I was walking in the mornings, or rather stumbling, and said, "You're doing this translation program? I want to do this book for you." So I said, "I have no idea about this." So he gave me a little synopsis. So I carried it to the advisory committee and said, "Of course we'll do this book." So you see, those sort of things also happen.
So, actually, what is the mandate of the advisory committee in the sense this entire project? What exactly are they trying to achieve? Something I would like to
So,
know.
of course, to promote Tamil is the core plan. That was the design in 2017. The GO of 18 September says so, through established publishers. But more recently, the government has decided to move it in the other direction: Tamil into Malayalam, Tamil into Kannada, Tamil into Telugu. And regional anchor editors have been appointed: Geeta Ramaswamy of Hyderabad Book Trust for Telugu, Professor V.S. Sridhara for Kannada, and Dr. A.J. Thomas, who's only too well known to all of you, for Malayalam. So they have selected 5 or 6 publishers, and in consultation with the publishers and the advisory committee, they've selected Tamil works, and the government is also funding that into those languages, those books. And in this instance, they're also covering the translator's fees. So there's that. And the next phase, which is just under planning, is to translate Malayalam works into Tamil, Telugu works into Tamil, and Kannada works into Tamil. So Dr. Jayeshi had given a very brief talk some months ago about the multilingual, what's the word she used? Habitus or something of the southern region, this Dravidian thing. So at least, some sort of understanding of these 4 languages, how we could work together. The Tamil Nadu government is keen to promote it. We hope to do 100 books by next year this time, into and out of Tamil, into and out of Malayalam, Telugu, Kannada, and Tamil into English.
Uh, it's a kind of a soft power initiative, seems like.
I hope so. And the interesting thing is that a lot of colleges and universities are very interested. The WCC have already had a webinar. Itaraj and many others are gearing up. If it weren't for the COVID thing, we could have promoted it more strongly, face to face. Though I find these Zoom sessions, though previously I was very resistant to it, but When you see a whole lot of very interested and enthusiastic faces on the screen, and they all come up with interesting questions, there is this intimacy is built up, which would not have been possible in typical podium and group situation where it may not have been that easy.
Um, I was wondering about this. That is, these days I've been looking more closely at translations, and I realized that a lot of works from the earlier periods, the 1920s, 1940s, 60s, have made a foray into English, like Jenny Butt's translation of Ratnodoli. You have Angare, which is actually a Urdu play, and was one of the first books to be censored in post pre-independence India. Actually, you have Jerry Pinto and his translation of Ranangan, the battlefield, which is again the 1920s book that was written. I was wondering what is prompting this. Also Aladi Uma and Sridhar's Asparshya Ganga, which is again a translation of a series of stories from Telugu. Uh, your thoughts on that? Why those are coming in this fashion?
Yeah, because I think those were, first of all, anything that is suppressed has a certain value, because why was it suppressed? Now we should bring it out. That's what I call the retrieval of history, retrieval of heritage, and the subaltern voice, certainly. Um, and there is also in publishing, while one group of marketing people say, give us a new book which is like the previous seller. They don't take risks. But where the editors have a bigger say, the editors want everyone would like to do the first Adivasi work, the first Dalit um, play, or the first. There's also the novelty of being the first there, the
Oh
first Urdu
yes,
novel.
Full Sangi, the first ever
Yeah,
translation of Bhojpuri into English.
that's it. You see, and there are so many languages that we have not been able uh, to honor at all. There's language politics there. I mean, in the Northeast, the Seven Sisters, what they call the Seven Sisters of languages. Only the mainstream, powerful Western, powerful languages which have, big newspapers, they have printing presses, they have those language medium schools. They, they are a body, they're a strong body, and they're able to, promote their language, in a very natural fashion. They don't even have to try that that body of it. Look at see. I remember when I took a book which I thought has been very great, something very new, short fiction from South India, which Subhashri Krishnaswamy, Srilata and I did together in 2007. It was done for study in classrooms. 12 stories, three each from the four big southern languages, and I suggested a source language text for each of the stories. The first page is also there in the original language, so that a student can read it and say, "Hey, I don't think this. I would have translated like this," to encourage all that. And then Subhashri and Srilata worked very hard on those exercises. I wrote an introduction. I was very proud of the book, and I took it to one of the booksellers and said, "Do you think you can stock some copies?" And she said, she's a very knowledgeable bookseller, Nalini Chetu. And she said, very nice. So she said, what about Konkani? So there and then my balloon collapsed. So I said, yeah, what about Konkani? I forgot. And she said, and Tulu? So I nearly, if there was a hole in the ground, I would have gone through it. So she said, don't you dare talk about southern languages, Mini. No, you haven't covered Tulu, you haven't covered Konkani, and God knows what else you left out. But okay, I'll sell the book. And of course, a couple of weeks later, she phoned and said, because very popular, and the tourists are picking it up. And I said I was hoping it would be a textbook, but somehow I don't know where it was prescribed. I think Hyderabad prescribed it, or Osmania, but individual copies sold very well. But there again, you see how blind we are uh, to what I mean. The first Tulu novel, I tried to do a novella, Tulu novella in translation as one of the novellas, but it was a most unusual work about how Mahalinga Bhatt, about how an old man diverts a river because it is damaging the crops and the thing. And so many very, very charming and interesting rituals of the village, the harvest customs. There's so many interesting things there. But I was never able to. It was a terrible translation, and I worked and polished it. But by the time I got it ready for press, Oxford closed that list, the novellas list. So the book never came out. So like that, there are, and the Sahitya Academy. You talked about the novellas. The Sahitya Academy has very nice novellas tucked into some of their anthologies. I wish somebody could do a real study of the Indian novella. There's so much there because it has all the features. It has the power of the short fiction and it has the features of the novel. And so many things I could have brought out in that series, but unfortunately, um, we had to close the list. Three or four of the novellas did very well because they were prescribed for study. Dvipa and Nabanita Dev Sen's Twilight Shelter and Vadi Vassal. They've all been prescribed and sold by the thousand. Vadi Vassal will soon be available in Malayalam.
Oh, really?
Yes, I think Olive Books or VC Thomas Editions. One of the two is going to bring it out. The
Okay.
government is supporting it.
Oh, the gripping narrative, isn't it?
It
Really.
is, yes.
And now that we were mentioning these big four languages and so on, what are your thoughts on so many of these Malayalam translations making it to the JCB list this time?
Yeah, I'm very happy to know that. I mean, uh, there were, the frequently stated point is that uh, the most number of submissions for the Nobel Prize used to be from Malayalam, and no sooner had a work from the South American, Spanish, the famous writers appeared in English translation, then it would be available in Malayalam. So, uh, shows the vigor and the richness of the culture, and also shows the politics of who gets published in translation and whom the publishers choose, what sort of book. Um, I'm a little afraid of, not that it's happening in Malayalam, but I'm a little afraid of what uh, was it Khalid Hussain, Muhammad Hussain, I forget the name of the writer, but 2 years ago when Arundhati Roy brought out her book, at the same time there was a book called Exit West,
Yes. Mosin
uh,
Hamid.
Mohsin Hamid. If you look at those two novels, there's a number of the components are the same. There's a terrorist, um, there's a transgender, there's a lesbian, and then the whole thing moves from New York and to Beijing, and then somewhere in Delhi, and then Karachi. So this is a great uh, deterrent to, I would say, great writing because these literary prizes are so attractive, and the power of what I call the king market, which I've written about for Mathabhumi portal, it'll appear 2 days from now, persuades even very, very great writers to fashion what I call the global novel. Somehow, and then the weather, the climate becomes, the environment becomes a character. Of course, these things are important. 2006 Frankfurt Book Fair was inaugurated by Mashita Devi, and it's the first time it struck me that we weren't paying enough attention to it in literature. And she said, whatever our concerns, the most important thing for us to be concentrating on, poets and writers, is the environment and the terrible degradation and the way we are ruining our own home. the earth, the world. And of course, she, of course, being having worked with tribals and knowing the degradation of that habitat and what it does to people, and the larger, the slower process of degradation of that entire region, she knew what she was talking about. But already that process had been put in place. Well, I don't know if it's too early to talk about how successful that would be. I have my doubts there. Uh, the proper study is man. But maybe the proper study of man is the earth. So the Malayalam works making it to these big prizes is indeed encouraging. But I hope it doesn't mean that the publishers are so magnetized to possibilities in Malayalam that they've forgotten that it might be equally rich in other languages as well. Perhaps they haven't researched other regions well enough, or they know but they don't want to take a risk.
That's possible. Of course, I'm also seeing a lot of works coming in from the northeast part of India, the Assam, Odia, uh, the Meghalaya, Manipur, those regions as well, but not as much as in translation as in original. Of course, you have the loneliness of Hira Barwa, Aruni, you know, their works, but yeah, but I think that's a great deal of polyphony that the translations have brought in, and polyphonies within translations as well.
That's right.
So
That's right.
I was asking you, I wanted to ask you, what do you think is going to be the way forward? How is it all going to?
I think it depends largely on how much attention we pay to language in the early years of the children who are fortunate enough in our country, poor country, to go to school. If we don't pay attention to language, then our future is very bleak. It'll be this SMS and WhatsApp language just at the surface. There won't be a deep understanding. See, even people who've been through very good schools and colleges, I'm talking about just this one language, English, since we're talking about translations into English, they don't know the difference between a, few, and few. Very, very simple things like that. So, if you don't pay attention to any language, whether it's English or Hindi or Malayalam or Kannada, and particularly if we don't pay attention to our own languages, the way forward, there may not be a way at all. And we would all be in just a sort of one McDonald like elevator going up and down with the same vocabulary being thrown up, tossed about here and there. And what I would call journalistic writing, smart writing, might well masquerade as great literature. There is a difference between literature and journalistic writing. Those those borders seem to be blurring. I I don't know enough. I'm not a sociologist. I'm not a linguist. Um, it might be radiating from this inattention to language. Everywhere people are complaining about the dip in grasp of language, but particularly in a country like ours, where we have huge riches, I think it would be almost a language ecocide. I think it's G. and Davy who used that word. And Sheldon Pollock wrote an article some years ago saying that there are some classical texts and their teachers are now in their 80s. And when those teachers die, nobody will open those texts again because these teachers have not been able to get students. So I think what the Tamil Nadu government is doing is setting a wonderful model in place because we are not looking only at contemporary literature or just fiction, but classical writing, poetry, um, uh, political treatises, lots of the entire range of what might be called a body of work in Tamil, literary Tamil in different forms. So and really the way forward is with support from governments. A little bit of this of the government spending money, if it is given to the cause of translation. And you see, there are in this particular area, like in let's say rural health area, where people with a sense of mission go out and work. You know, translation is an area where people with a sense of mission will participate, and it's actually quite easy for governments to support their own regional languages, the linguistic markers. I would say that that's the way forward, and if there can be a strong appeal from academia to whichever body decides their curricula, their syllabus, choice of texts, that 50% of our literary works in our literature courses should come from regional languages. Of that, at least 30% from that region, and the rest a fair distribution of texts from other languages, all in translation. So then you set up this healthy network. You respect other people's writing, you respect other languages, and then people say, yes, in Kerala University, in with Sonya's college, there is a chance for us to go and speak and present our text. So somebody might come flying out from different parts of India. And now with these Zoom discussions and all that, so much is possible. You can bring a writer straight into your classroom or a translator. So that's the way forward, I think. Government funding and commitment from those who have a stake in the language. And bring the language to the children at their formative years, their sponge years. Somebody called it, Judith Thurman used the word sponge years, where you can easily absorb. As pidgin in any Creole thing. Pidgin is created by children playing together.
I think this has been a wonderful conversation as far as I'm concerned, because not only did I listen to you, I'm also learning. It's been a very transformative and educational process as far as I'm
Excellent.
concerned, because it's lovely to speak to somebody who doesn't seem to have a vision at the level of the obvious, but does seem to have a very deep rooted commitment, which in turn translates as vision.
Oh,
So.
thanks. Commitment, yes. I suppose I could have been a very successful journalist or somebody big in advertising, but I chose this profession, and it's been very rewarding. It's like watching your child winning a race when when a translator does well and a book does well, and or even someone just gets translated. And the joy of the writer who appears in translation, because that's the other thing. Our whole language history has made our regional language writers feel deprived, not inferior, because they know their strengths, but they feel deprived. I wish I too could appear in English. And then they sign up contracts with people where they are not given their due. And these things are very sad. Those things, Arunava Sinha actually had a very nice uh, lecture where he told writers and translators the things they need to do. Oh, sorry, translators. Well, the things they need to do step by step by step before they publish. Get the permission. Make sure there's no legal block, and then make sure you get your correct terms, fair terms. Make sure you get an advance. These are the things you should do. So perhaps literary agents can play that role, but and that too is part of the commercial aspects, also part of the scene. I'm so happy that the Tamil Nadu government is going to support translators, Malayalam translators, Telugu and Kannada of Tamil. I'm very happy to hear that, and the other way around also. We also need to eat our ice creams.
I agree. For me personally, this, as I told you, was very rewarding because I was in school and my library had one copy of the Katha, collection, short stories, one of the editions. It was all there was. And I remember reading it, and I remember very specifically some of the stories that had been translated and were part of the Katha. And now you happen to mention it. And then, my own first conscious contact with translation was actually through Ponniyin Selvan. That is when I actually began paying attention to this entire genre of literature that we call translation. And to think of it, it was serendipity that I was in contact with Dr. Jayashree and the Samyukta journal, and the way that all of it just melded into the research foundation, and now they are carrying forward so much of works in
Yes.
translation, and now all of that culminates in our conversation here today. And,
Thank you.
and since you believe in the destiny of a work, I think that this was also a conversation that was meant to happen at one
Waiting
point
to
or
happen. Thank you so much.
another.
Okay.
So
Bye.
I
And
had a wonderful time talking to you.
thank you. Happy World Translation Day to the Samyukta team and the Samyukta Press.
And to you too,
Thank you.
who seems to be making so much of it possible.
Thank you.
And so that brings us to the end of this leg of the conversation. We should
Okay.
take it up again sometime later.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thank you
Okay.
very much and have a
Bye.
good day.
Have a nice day. Bye.